how many of you guys are familiar with TED Talks? Everybody, yeah, it's pretty. Obviously, it's a pretty common thing, and I've watched them myself many times, and I found them really fascinating sometimes. They're just really intriguing. Um, what does it stand for? I believe I looked it up one time. Yeah, technology, entertainment, I think.
It's entertainment.
And the other one is like development or something. I can't remember exactly. It might be something
Nothing you
else.
would guess.
Yeah. So I they're great, but there's a few things about it which I feel are. I mean, like for the purpose that they're designed for, it's great, but I feel it's insufficient in certain ways, and so a couple things are uh, limits and length of time. So TED Talks, pretty much from what I looked at, are limited to 18 minutes or less. Now that can be great, for if that's what you want your group to be like. But there's many times there's topics that 18 minutes isn't really going to do justice to. 18 minutes you can get a good intro, but you can't really dive deeper than that. The other thing is like there's limits in who can present and what can be presented. So um, basically like you have to be nominated for these TED Talks, and then you have to be approved. You have to go through this process, and then I think what I was reading, this was a while ago that I was looking into this because I was like, oh, I'd like to do a TED Talk, and then I was looking into it, and there's all these requirements. I'm like, okay, never mind. But basically, I think they have like themes or like, but they're very broad themes, but they kind of want the talks to be about that subject. So for those reasons, it's very, in some ways, it's limiting. So I wanted to do something which is similar to TED Talks, but which gets rid of those negative aspects, and which I am perceiving to be negative aspects, and that is allowing for longer presentations. But someone said they only want to do a 5-minute thing, and that's fine too. But I want to allow for a longer presentation if needed. And then the other thing is, none of us are necessarily experts on things, or we didn't go through this extreme process of having to go through a confirmation process to be able to present. So many times people have something they want to share, but they don't have a way to share it or a voice. So I think this is a great opportunity to give people a chance to share something interesting with others that they might not normally get a chance to talk about it. And freedom to talk about pretty much any topic. I want to make it so that pretty much any topic can be discussed, with the exception of like, I don't have like a clear cut, we can't talk about these things, but there are certain things, like I guess I would have to just judge based on a personal discretion of my own. But to give you an idea, like, the horrible tragedy in New Zealand that happened recently. If someone's going to come in and say, this is why I think that was a good thing, I wouldn't allow that type of thing to be presented. So there's certain things where, like, inherently hateful stuff, I don't want to allow to be presented, and also like illegal stuff, I don't want that type. But other than that, like, I kind of want it to be open-ended, and I was kind of trying to think of like the logistics of some of these things, and one of the things that I came upon is if we had a much larger group and like a bunch of people wanted to share things, we could do it in a voting process where like, let's say a bunch of people have their ideas, but some ideas are a little bit controversial and might make people uncomfortable. Well, if we have a voting process, then if it's too uncomfortable for most people, in the group meeting, it wouldn't be presented because everybody would vote on which one they want to hear next. So I think that's a good way to kind of balance it out, to especially because you don't want to have like a dialogue or discussion with someone like who isn't interested in discussing or being open to that topic. So I want it so that people are comfortable, but also this group works best with people who are open-minded and open to like completely different perspectives than their own, and it could be controversial or even potentially offensive. But you had a question, right? And so another thing that my thought is that it would be good to have like interaction, but not in a debate type of way. I mean, we could potentially do debates. Yeah. So the thing that's good about the questions is like, I mean, you could try to like use it as a loophole to debate or argue, but it's kind of hard to some extent to do that because the questioning, it's more about like instead, like when you're doing a debate, typically you're focused on trying to prove yourself right. Like, this is why I think I'm right. Whereas if you're questioning someone, you're challenging them. You're saying, when you said this, I heard something else. What would you say to that? Or, that type of thing where it brings it to presenter focused rather than like in a debate. It's kind of like, I want to win the argument. Whereas in this question and answer thing, it's more of listening further what their perspective is. So now I do want to say that like I think I'm kind of inclined to think that like pretty much we could discuss anything. Like so serious could be a serious subject, or it could be something humorous or artistic. And then I also have here, could be religious, secular, historical, scientific, philosophical. I was saying to Alex a few weeks ago, like for the religious stuff, I'm religious, but at the same time, like I don't want it to be like someone comes here and says, okay, I want to do a Bible study, like as their presentation. Like I kind of want it to be something where like it can be applicable to everybody. So like, for example, we were saying like comparative religion, like looking at different religions, seeing their similarities, common ground, and trying to understand different perspectives better. I think that might be one of the better ways to approach like religious topics, for example. And so I have here eight items which I kind of feel like is the purpose of this group, and that's to make positive connections with people. So kind of like what did you say? You said cooperating. What did you say?
Cooperative.
Cooperative. Yeah, like so making connect these meetups. Therefore, meetups in general. Therefore, making connections with people. I think it's good to make positive connections with people. So there's that purpose. Then there's to understand people who have beliefs and values different to our own. It's very easy to like, well, if someone differs from us, we often don't understand why that is, and it can be very tense, and there can be a lot of hatred when there's lack of understanding. So I think it's important to try to understand the other side, and because how can we fix problems? The best way to fix problems is to try to figure out where we're disagreeing and why we're disagreeing, and then maybe we can bridge the gap. But if you're not taking the time to understand what the other side is, then then you won't make any progress with the other side. Then there's the third one was to find common ground between different groups that have different beliefs. The next one, to seek peace and harmony between all groups to the best we can. So, there's so much division in this country, unnecessary in many ways. I think a great way to progress and fix the problems in our society is for both sides to try to be peaceful towards one another. But obviously there are times where peace or harmony isn't practical, especially if the other side isn't willing to, but we should try to seek that. So that's kind of what this is about. And in line with that, eliminate hate as much as practical. This next one's really, really important to me, is to encourage open-mindedness and critical thinking to everything. To seek the truth and try to help each other come to the understanding of what is true, and to learn and grow with each other. So, back when I was in high school in like 11th grade, which was about 10 years ago or something, I had a philosophy class which was called Theory of Knowledge. This was at Schenectady High School. And as a student, I was often fooling around, not really doing my homework all the time. But the teacher, he taught us as a class. He taught us one lesson that kind of stuck with me this entire time, and I feel like it really changed me. And that was, he basically said, question everything. And that really resonated with me, because it's like, if what we believe is true, then we should be able to prove it. And if we can't prove it, then we need to try to see why we can't. And if we shouldn't assume we're right about what we've been taught, or what we believe, so we should always ask questions, even the hard questions. A lot of people don't want to ask those hard questions, especially if the potential implications of answers is too much for them to handle. I love to ask those type of questions. I've gone through lots of changes in my life, some radical changes sometimes, and it can be tough, but typically the process I go through when asking these questions to myself, and I tend to change more when it's me. Like, I might have an argument with someone and I disagree with them, but then I think about what they said later, and I ask myself some of those questions and really dig deeper, and I realize actually what they said was right. That makes sense. I feel like the process often is, you kind of put up your defenses at first, but then over time, more and more evidence starts accumulating until eventually you're like, okay, there's too much evidence for me to deny this any longer. I'm going to change my perspective on this. That's kind of what I have, my journey has been. So going forward in these meetings, I'm not going to do this type of intro. Basically, I'll probably do like a very basic intro, like 5-10 minutes. This is what PEP Talk is. Okay, who wants to present? That type of thing. Now, as you guys also notice, when I sent out the invite for the group or the schedule, when you RSVP'd, it said, did you want to present something? So that's one way. If you want to present something, you can say there. But also, what I'm thinking is, like, at the beginning of meetings, we have a sheet where people write down that they have something they want to share. So I think that would be good because yeah, that would be an option. I think that's a good way to do it. I also think, I mean, some people don't have as many things they're passionate about, but I have a lot of things that I feel strongly about that are to some extent controversial, but in varying degrees. Like certain subjects are more controversial than others just because of their inherent nature. Like politics tends to be controversial, right? But like other things are controversial, but not in a like for example, um, this is one that I'm thinking of doing at some point in the future. Uh, I don't really agree with the whole concept of copyright. Um, so for
I loved it.
yeah,
Intellectual property.
yeah, so that can be controversial, but like for the not now,
Oh,
but
not now.
for the regular person, it's not too controversial. For the producers of movies, music, books, it might be more controversial to discuss that with them. But so it's things like that where it can be about anything. That's something that I feel strongly about. But there's all kinds of other issues, like how I feel about animals, and all kinds of things. As of right now, I'm having it as a monthly meeting. If people are wanting to do it more often, that's something we can look into too. Also, right now I'm having it on the weekends. But perhaps weekdays work better for some people. I feel like weekends are probably better for most people, but
Summertime.
yeah. So, but these are all things we can work out as it progresses. Hopefully, more people are gonna attend in future ones, but we don't know. And this is the first time that I signed up for to make my own meetup group. So what you have to do for that is you pay like a monthly fee, or you could also do annual, and that fee is to allow your group to be on their website, and they'll advertise your group sometimes, like recommended groups, things like that. But it gives me I'm allowed to make 3 meetup groups with the what I have, the subscription thing. So I could make this is my one group. I could also make 2 other groups. So there's possibilities going forward of even expanding into different things. Like I know you guys talked about. Some of you guys have done like board game things. So like we could also do other things besides the pep talk. Like if we wanted to branch off and do like a secondary group with the people who go to these pep talks, that's an option going forward. But I don't want to like take too much on my plate all at once and just dive right into it, especially when this is all kind of unfamiliar territory, and I don't know how successful or popular this is going to be. Now, I did mention for my YouTube channel, there's I could do. What do you guys think? Should I make a secondary channel? Like, should I?
What's your primary channel?
My primary channel is about like basically religious stuff. Secondary channel. So
you don't want to commingle people's IP with other subject areas.
Yeah. So what I'll probably do is I'll just do like I'll create a secondary channel and I'll just call it like Pep Talk or something.
You may want to get signatures for those things. Yes.
Signatures?
Release.
Oh, okay.
If
Yeah,
put
that's
them on your site.
yeah.
If I may, this seems like a good point to interject. So I wanted to engage people here and just ask everybody in the room why we came. Let me start.
Okay.
Is that
Yeah,
okay?
that's fine.
Just real quick. So I saw PEP and I saw the word TED, like a TED Talk. So, I enjoy TED. I like the mind expanding. I feel like information delivery in the future, I kind of work in information delivery, and I feel like information delivery in the future is going to be a lot of this pre-digested presentation of hours of research. So TED Talks, yes, they're limited to 18 minutes, but they have a lifetime of research behind it. And it's curated and condensed and delivered in a way where somebody who listens for 18 minutes then gets a much bigger ROI of information delivery, where they get a glimpse into their world. Wow, all this is done. I never knew this stuff before, and now I do. I also kind of approached this meeting with another meta layer, where it's good practice engaging with other people. If I come up and present something, it's a good way for me to learn to do that as well. So it's not just about the information passing between people, but it's also about growing and developing skills as well. So that's kind of where my thought process went when I signed up for the group.
What do you guys? Do you want to share, or you don't have to?
For me, I want to see what people have to say. I want to hear interesting things. And eventually I want to present stuff that I'm interested in and haven't had time to do research on, or haven't taken the time to do research on, because I'll say it's something I'll look into in the future.
Yeah.
And this will kind of motivate me to sit down and then go through stuff and organize my thoughts and then have a thesis and arrange a nice presentation. So I'll benefit from that as well. I think that's basically what I was hoping to get out of it.
For me, it was that for whatever odd reason I like to present stuff, I don't mind going through the preparation, bringing up the topic and explain it, so show it to people and start discussions about it. But also, I found like the most interesting thing about the presentation, where kind of idea was like, well, you don't publish an agenda up front. You basically come to the meeting and you don't really know what to expect. You don't really know what the topics will be about. And I find that was basically the important thing, because I like the idea of going somewhere and being exposed to things that I probably would never have an interest in.
Yeah.
And then have someone with, at least some sort of knowledge or passion about it present that to me. And it's like, hey, this is interesting. This is never thought about. So, wow, something like that exists. So
Yeah.
things like that. And that's why.
Wow. I like that. That's good. So I did like I wrote up kind of like a little bit of a thing for my first presentation, and that's basically, it's in the same line of thinking here. What it is the reason why we should be open to what others have to say, and that is like, I'm going to highlight some of these things like just off my head, and then I want to read some of the stuff here.
Are you starting a presentation?
Continuing. It's like part of the same. So basically, so for example, I believe culture very much affects how we think. So we grew up in well, I don't know about everybody, but I grew up in America as my primary culture, and majority of Americans they were raised in the American culture, and so like our society has values. Now there's differences, like like, conservative, liberal, or whatever, but there are general trends and ways of thinking, especially like in general in the Western world. And then you compare it to other societies. Like there are countries which are Muslim majority, and basically Islam is like the state religion or whatever. So what we believe is very much influenced by where we were born, who we've interacted with. So like if you were born in a Muslim majority country, your religion would probably be Islam. And especially in older times, if you were born in a Christian group, your beliefs would probably be identical or similar to the group that you were raised up in. So it's easy for us to just assume that what we were raised up in is the truth, and not really question what other cultures or what other groups have to say on the issues. But I think that can be detrimental to progress and knowing what is true, and because, as I said, every culture differs in their values. So if every culture has a different perspective on it, then how do we know our culture? And what are the odds that we were born in the right one, but everyone else was born wrong? And then it's also very likely the case, like, it tends not to be black and white. Like, it tends not to be this group's right and this group's wrong. It tends to be this group's right about many things and wrong as well about many things, and this group also is right about other things and wrong about some things. Like, so it kind of meshes together, and there's no clear-cut answer of this culture is right and this culture is wrong. And as I said, same thing for religion. What you're raised up as in. There's a tendency, like if you're raised as a Christian, if you were to ask most Christian people, have you ever considered the possibility that Islam is true or Hinduism? Most of them probably never have even considered that possibility. But they will then expect people from other religions. They'd be like, well, why haven't you considered Christianity? It doesn't make sense. They're thinking from their perspective. If you're born a Hindu, why should you consider these other religions? So that's you're self-focused of, this is how I was raised, so I'm not going to question it. If there is a true religion, for example, if you just stick to your this is what I was raised mentality, then you would never grow to a superior understanding of your faith. And so, but that it's not just limited to religion, but like politics, for example, just in general. If you assume you're right with because that's how you were raised, how many people are raised in, conservatives, they have kids and they raise their kids with conservative values, and then that perpetuates the cycle. It's the same thing typically, like if liberals have kids, their kids tend to be liberal. Of course, there are exceptions where the kids rebel against their parents' values or things like that, but there's general trends. People tend to not question what they've been taught, or they question it, but only to a certain extent. So these are things which should make us think, okay, maybe we need to be more open-minded to other perspectives. And like, for example, a lot of people are very confident in science, for example. Yeah, sure.
So what's the value of open-mindedness?
The value of open-mindedness? Yeah. So when someone says open-mindedness, I feel that there can be a misunderstanding there. Like, open-mindedness doesn't mean that you don't have confidence in what you believe. It just basically means you're open to evidence that you're wrong about something. If evidence comes and presents if evidence points to something else that is against what you believe, then you're open to that. You're like, oh, okay, if there's evidence that I'm wrong, then I will change. Whereas a lot of people tend to overlook things that disagree.
So it's about finding truth.
I would say open-mindedness is about finding truth.
Why do you care?
Why do you care about why?
Yeah, I mean, like when you talk about things like cultural. Okay, so for instance, capitalism.
Yeah.
Right, Western society kind of worships capitalism as a
Yeah.
religion. And then you have, I guess, China worships socialism, right? And it's not clear to me that one is true.
Right. So,
There's no true concept there. It's just like what kind of works for you, and that's a function of your society.
Well, that's an aspect of truth, though, in the sense that, like, so for example, certain things are as what you said, like they are subjective, and so, but there's other things which are more like for example, you guys are all here. That's not that's not subjective, that is what is true. That you guys are in this room right now, for example. But there's other things which as you were saying, like values, different perspectives, which depending on what those are, they can be like there might not be a true answer. They both might work in different situations. But there's other things where like for example, if you talk about from the philosophical or religious perspective again of is there a God? Either there's a God or some God concept, or there's not. Like there's like there's a truth to that. And then as you say, what's the purpose of why should we care about what's true or what's not? I think that so that's why I think we should try to, if we are able to, maybe we can. And then if you're trying to find out what is true, maybe you discover what you just said. Maybe you end up discovering that everybody has their different truths. There is no truth, but you might discover something different. And I think if we don't know, if it's unknown to us, then like how many of you guys want to help people? Do you guys have like a desire to help people in the world, like in general?
Yes.
I would say a lot of people do. Just or at least not harm people. So you have to think about like the implications of what you do. Like, are my actions going to harm people? What can I do to make the world a better place? And it's not always an easy answer, but I think that it's important to try to look into the possibility that there may be an answer, but we just have to try to seek it out.
Okay, so
then we would just listen or investigate what the different groups have to say, and then for ourselves we would have to determine whether we feel their perspective is true or not from what they've shared or from what someone has shared. It can be useful can be true. It all depends on so. And I use true perhaps differently than other people use true. But so for me, like true is what is real, what is actual. So
okay, let's put it this way. How do you think cultural values come about? Where do those come from? Is it because cultures are seeking truth, or are they just seeking rules that are useful?
So I think that cultures, it's not a clear-cut answer to that, because culture develops from different reasons. For example, the type of clothes someone wears, like that's more of like preference or style over time. There's other things which are, well, it all, people are very much influenced by literature and writings. So the a lot of these other places, like they have their writings, which are their tradition, their what they look to as evidence for. And an interesting thing is like science. We connect science with like, what do you guys think when you hear science? When people say scientists, or at school you have the subject science, but when you look into the etymology of science, for example, science means knowledge, and it and there are also like social sciences and all kinds of different sciences that aren't necessarily limited to what some people might associate with science, like biology or chemistry. So for me, science is just about trying to figure things out, especially from nature.
So that's what I would say. Science is about truth in some sense, right? And then cultural values and that kind of stuff is more about what's useful as a set of rules.
Well, cultural values often try to say what science is. Like they kind of overlap sometimes. I think.
Yeah, it's just like religion tries to say.
I'm sorry, this is a presentation, and I apologize for asking this question, but what is the subject? You're delivering information to us. I think from what I'm trying to gain, it's about either the value of culture or free thinking or question everything. What's the theme that I should be focused on when listening to your words?
So the theme that I'm trying to focus on is why we shouldn't assume what we've been taught is true, and why we should be open to other people's perspectives.
So the open mind, so question.
Yes, the question things, open-mindedness. So I don't know, have you guys done much research into like psychology or anything? I did a little bit of psychology stuff, but I was going to be a psychology major, but I dropped out of college. So basically there's memory biases and other types of biases, like cognitive biases, which cloud our thinking. And there's also fallacies, realizing that a lot of what we think isn't necessarily accurate. I started off with the memory biases. So we have the verbatim effect. We tend to remember the gist of what we think someone says rather than the exact words. So where this can go wrong is if you're reading into something that someone else says, you think they mean something else. When you remember what they said, you're not remembering the exact words. You're remembering the gist of it. So that can create a lot of misunderstanding and misrepresentation of what the other person said. Then there's suggestibility. Ideas suggested by a questioner are mistaken for memory. So there have been times in my life where like someone has said something where it makes me think, oh, did I do that? I think maybe I did that. Like there are times where like I can't remember exactly if I did something or not, and someone says that I did do that, and that makes me feel like I might have done that. There's things like that where sometimes people can actually be tricked into thinking that something happened which didn't actually happen. There's also source confusion, which is misattributing the source of a memory. And so, for example, if you watched a home video from your your family videos, but then years later you remember that video, but you think it's a memory from when you were actually there, but you're actually just remembering the video that you watched. So that can be a way of where you are misattributing the source of that memory. Another thing is like when you are dreaming, sometimes dreams are pretty realistic and you actually think you're not dreaming. So sometimes you have to wonder how many of what we believe happened to us in our memories was actually something we dreamed. It's kind of one of those blurry lines of how do we know. Then also, this is called the serial position effect. If you have like a really long list of something, it says that items near the end of a list are easiest to remember, and items at the beginning are next easiest to remember, but then the items in the middle are the ones that are hardest. So we can often overlook things if it's all like muddled in the middle. Like if we're trying to find what is true, if we have a lot of stuff being presented to us, we can tend to overlook evidence if it's not clearly like in the forefront. So that's something we have to keep in mind with when we're trying to learn. Let's see here. Okay, this one's called illusory correlation. That's inaccurately seeing a relationship between two events related by coincidence, which a lot of people do. They see something, okay, that seems too similar, like that happened at the same time, that must mean that they're related somehow. Often they're not, but people draw false conclusions by that. Let's see. Then this says illusion of truth effect. This is people are more likely to identify as true statements they have previously heard. So a person is more likely to believe a familiar statement than an unfamiliar one. And so these next ones are related to imagination. Cryptomnesia, where a memory is mistaken for imagination. So like a distant memory that you've long forgotten pops up in your head, but you just think that's just your imagination. And then the opposite is where your imagination you're mistaking for a memory. And then there's, I'm sure you guys have heard of this one, confirmation bias. And that is, we tend to look for things that confirm what we already believe, and then things that could potentially disagree with us, we don't really tend to look into that much. And this kind of, with the whole anxiety thing, spotlight effect, the tendency to overestimate the amount that other people notice your appearance or behavior. Like, we think that if we did something wrong, everybody's looking at us, everybody's judging us. But most of the time, everybody's focused on themselves and they're not really caring too much about what's happening with other people. Then I can testify to this. So this is, called the cross-race effect. So it's a tendency for people of one's own race to have difficulty identifying members of a race other than their own. So, like some people feel like all Asians look the same or all black people look the same. I think the reason for that is because they're different, and we tend to be, things that are different tend to be more foreign to us, whereas things that are similar tend to be easier to identify with. And I think that can lead to that can lead to potential bias, especially when it leads to like racism. Because if you see people of other races as difficult to distinguish, then you can kind of group them together, and that can lead to unfortunate conclusions. And let's see. So then these are social biases. So authority bias, tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure on any topic and be more influenced by that opinion. So if you value an authority and they speak on like any issue, you're more likely to give you're more likely to be open to what they say, or more accepting of what they say, their opinion on any topic, than you would be if, like, say, someone you don't like, if they say something, you might be more skeptical of what they're saying. See, I'm going to skip some of these. I'm just trying to see which ones we should do. Okay, so this is group attribution error. Belief that the characteristics of an individual group member are reflective of the group as a whole, or the opposite. What the group decides is reflective of preferences of each individual. So that's like, again, it's like generalization. Like, all people of this group think a certain way because this person in that group did, and that can lead to very negative conclusions and often lead to divisiveness. Instead of trying to understand the different sides, if you think all people of that group are like this, then the people in that group that aren't like that, they will see that as them being unreasonable. So it makes it harder for people to respect each other when they're making assumptions about each other's sides like that. I'll just mention, like, for politics, for example. I come from a family that's very conservative, but I also have a sister and brother-in-law who are more liberal. I'm also liberal in many ways, but I'm kind of like, in some ways I'm in the middle. And so it kind of makes for interesting discussions, and like, I feel like it's important to give people the benefit of the doubt. And what I've noticed is a tendency for, like, when I've heard conversations by my family about, for example, things that were said about Obama, and people online who would say things about Obama, they would be extremely overly critical in a way that I found over the top. But I found that that was also happening from the other side too. Like, so both sides were attacking the other candidate, but like demonizing them, like making them to be pure evil and have no good qualities. And I think that is detrimental to. I think it's detrimental to if you are presenting them as pure evil, then it just creates unnecessary hostility and division. So, anyways, I guess I'll probably end it here. I would just say that biases and fallacies, there are so many. Like, if you go on Wikipedia, there's like an extremely lengthy list of them, and when you start looking at them and thinking, how are you possibly guilty of doing some of these things, it really starts to bring up the real possibility that you may be wrong about a lot of things, and that we have to be open to other people have to say, because of our own biases that we might not even know we have. and we often will be guilty of fallacies. So we should try to discover in ourselves what our fallacies are that we use sometimes, what our biases are, and then we should try to fix that. Try not to use fallacies. We should try not to be biased as best we can. It's probably impossible to be completely free of bias, but we should try to be aware of those things, those obstacles, and then just try to be open to what people have to say on different things. We shouldn't just believe whatever they say, but we should hear them out at least and then go from there. So anyways, that's pretty much it. That's kind of why I wanted to do these pep talks, because I think a lot of people have interesting things they want to share, but they don't really have a way to share it with people. And I think if we have a place where people are free to share on things, as you said, new ideas that we might not be exposed to, this provides an outlet for that. So.
Okay. So feedback?
Yeah.
Let's see. So let me talk about subject matter. It looks like you took an adversarial role toward culture and the dissemination of how people adopt cultural traits and reject other cultural traits, and then you fell into the cognitive biases that develop that actually encompass the human brain. Our brains are designed to lie to us, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because that's how we survive and function as human beings. Culture dissemination, the information that's stored within us by the people around us, that's how we integrate with society. That's how humans as a species gets to fit in and be productive and interact with each other in a localized setting. By having that culture, as a human grows up, their brains are constantly maturing, developing. The plasticity of the brain doesn't stop developing until age 25 or more. Children and youth don't have the capacity to question everything, to think in certain abstract elements that lets them be woke, kind of like things like that. Having a cultural background and a foundation lets them fit in with their peers, with their elders, with other people in their culture, and integrate with society right away. So there's a lot of positive aspects to culture. There's also a lot of positive aspects to the cognitive biases that encompass our human brain. So you don't want to. It's good to identify and be cognizant of things that you do, but you don't want to fight yourself, because you're going to have. You want to stay integrated, and I don't want to say in absolute terms, but there are a lot of good purposes to and survival techniques that cognitive biases provide you. I've looked at this. Actually, one of my best friends is in artificial intelligence, and you don't want machines to artificially create what a human decides, because there's a lot of flawed logic in there. But there's a lot of purpose to it. So that was my feedback. Instead of being adversarial toward a lot of these things, there's a lot of positivity as well that should be recognized. Maybe we can. The presentations focused on the thought. There was some meandering. I know it's our first ones, but when it comes to like cognitive biases, you had some thoughts on some and not so much on others. Instead of reading us the website and giving your thoughts, on each one, you can let us know that they're there. We can review them, and then you can provide your thoughts in that, and have a direction, So hopefully constructive.
Yeah. Did anyone else have any questions or?
Well, I was going to ask. I agree with what you said. I think that these biases serve an evolutionary purpose, just like the cultures have evolved, because they have some usefulness to them. But we also evolved like storing fat and sickle cell anemia. So we still have to, the sort of mental structures and social structures that we evolve with are like the physical structures. We have to compensate for them when they go too far. The thing I was going to ask you is, so this is an interesting question to me about the usefulness of biases and that kind of stuff, because sometimes you see people saying like stereotyping is bad is kind of a mantra.
Yeah.
But I'm not convinced that that's always true, right? I don't think even people always buy that, because on the one hand they'll say like stereotyping is bad in this situation and then it's good in this other situation. So I don't know. I thought that's something interesting about. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, so I think I wanted to speak about the culture thing first. I think that I do think cultural differences are I wasn't trying to necessarily take a adversarial approach to culture, but that I was trying to emphasize that there when cultures are trying to when they are coming together to understand each other, you need to realize that they're from a different culture and try to understand their perspective. And that it's one thing when your culture has certain values that allow you to function as a society, but it's another thing when the culture has values which are detrimental to that society. So I think that not that culture is bad, but that culture can lead to bad things. So it's like with the biases. A lot of those biases, like memory biases, for example, a lot of them are there for a reason. Like when I was looking on the site, one of the things was childhood amnesia that was listed as a memory thing, and all that is that when from your childhood you tend not to remember those events from your younger years. And I think that there's a very logical reason that you don't have those memories, because your brain is designed to try to focus on what's most important. So I do think we shouldn't just completely write off biases, but that we should be aware of the limits of these things and where we could go wrong if we don't keep those things in check. And can you say what you were saying again?
Yeah, so my question was about the value of stereotyping. I don't know what exactly the question is there. I don't want to give specific examples because it's a sensitive issue, but I think sometimes people will stereotype and they'll say, oh, this is acceptable, and then when other people stereotype, they say, well, that's just horrible. You're a horrible person, you shouldn't be stereotyping.
Right.
And I'm somewhere in between. I think stereotyping can be useful.
I think so for example, if in your experience whenever you meet a certain type of person, they have acted a certain way around you, I think it's reasonable to be suspicious of someone in that same group. But I think it's one thing to be extra cautious and thinking someone. So I think where stereotyping might be more acceptable is probabilities. Someone from a certain group is more likely to be this way than another group.
So let's go back to the AI that you mentioned, right? So one thing that there's a huge concern over sort of the use of big data or whatever nowadays is when they do sort of law enforcement things using big data. So I think they can, I don't know what they're using for, sentencing guidelines or something. They can try to fit models to determine sentencing guidelines. And if you're not careful, you can end up learning sort of biases based on things like gender or race that you really don't
You're
want
saying
it
the
to.
AI could learn that.
Yeah, because it's learning from basically these probabilities, right? So if I don't know, you look at the FBI data, it says stuff about how people do more violent in some sense, right?
Right.
So if you fit some sort of model on that, and then you try to apply it to an individual, that's not necessarily true.
Right.
You don't want to say because the probability that somebody from this population is criminal is larger, you're going to assume that given the individual
Right. That's
treatment is
right. It's one thing to say probable. It's another thing to say therefore we should treat them.
right, and that's but that's the same thing that we're doing as humans, right? When we stereotype.
I think there's a difference between stereotyping and data-driven decisions. So a lot of what machine learning does is it's based off of data, and data question may be flawed, or not. But what happens in the artificial realm is it has to have hard facts to create these models and create decisions based on empirical evidence. What stereotyping does is it's decisions using a lot of these fallacies that is not based on evidence. So be careful when if you have personal experiences with a certain group of people, and then you look at another person in that group and you're like, I'm afraid of this person. That's not a stereotype. That is empirical. That's an empirical evidence, an internal truth to yourself that you have experience and you're applying it towards your own personal survival. A lot of these things are based around survival of self and species. Stereotypes don't have the proof, is what happened. It's a learned thing where you're told and it got through some kind of fallacy. You learn because your father told you this. Well, you don't have personal proof, but now you have a stereotype. Racism is one example of that. But if you have personal proof of existing data, that's not stereotyping.
Well, I mean, the question is what is stereotyping?
Yeah.
Is it necessarily a bad thing? But I would say, I mean, okay, let's say how many black people can you how many black people can you meet and have negative experiences with before you generalize to, I don't know, however many.
Because you're overgeneralizing. You need to have more indicators to narrow down your set.
Exactly. So it's like, I don't know. I feel there is value in generalizing it to say, but it's a tough one. But to go back to the AI, I have a perfect example of why you can't just say, oh, it's using empirical data. So one of the models, I have a colleague who is working on sort of fitting a model that will predict for students, high school students, what are good colleges that they would be able to get into and they perform well in. And so one of the issues that they saw is like it will not recommend top schools to minority students. And that's just because there's a bias historically towards minority students not going to these schools. It's not because, so the problem is there's no counterfactuals.
Mm-hmm.
We just have the data as it is. We don't know the reason that the data looks like it looks.
You're assuming that history is an indicator to the future when you're basing it on the past, right?
Yeah, so that kind of stuff you have to be careful with.
So you got to bake and change.
Yeah.
Did someone else want to say anything?
One thing that you mentioned about the cultural upbringing, like that shapes values or beliefs or views. I didn't grow up in the US, grew up in Germany, and one of the differences in culture are not as drastic, they're still there. So things where I, even to this day, sometimes shake my head about, for people who live here and grew up here, that's really nothing more concern. Because they are just accustomed to it. They don't know it any different. And for them, it's not anything where they would see it as a negative. It's just, they may not like it, but they don't. Like one example, I mean, people around here complain about the streets, that they're like potholes and really, really bad condition, but there really is no effort or intent to change anything. There's no people who go and write letter campaigns to their mayor and says like, we demand that you fix our roads. I don't see that. Whereas in Germany, less so in the past decade or so, but traditionally infrastructure was a big thing, was taken care of because that is what the whole society, the whole economy is based on. That's what we needed. And the two may even be like all like historical events, like Germany or Europe in general, there was a war, basically destroyed pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Whereas here in the US, while there was like, it had a significant economic impact on people, but there was like no physical destruction.
Right.
Except for fuel places. Yeah. So, and that's kind of like this mindset where, yeah, we just fill in the potholes with some more patch and be done with it. It's kind of something that's maybe not liked here, but it's acceptable. Whereas, let's say, Germany or Europe in general, that will be absolutely just not acceptable at all.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like really kind of like goofy things like that. But there's like other things. For example, one of the hot topics of debate is universal health. In Germany, everybody has health. If you cannot pay for it yourself, the state government will pay for it. You have the freedom to choose which insurance company you want to be a customer of. It's not your employer determining where you want to go.
Yeah.
You won't make that choice. It's also, there's a limit as to how much access fees can be. So there can be insurance that is like, oh, I charge not a lot of money. Then there's like a maximum of that. You can go lower and then basically transfer for customers to those things. Things like that, and it's even the whole idea of that being kind of a more social community idea where those who earn more they pay more. Whereas here, it doesn't matter if you make minimum wage or if you're the CEO who makes like 2,000 times as much. The access fee for health insurance of that company is exactly the same for everyone. And those are things where around here people may not know it being different. But for me, this is like a concept that I just don't understand. That's the cultural difference of the upbringing. And it's just like really hard to say that, well, this one is better than the other, or this one has like more truth to it, or this one is like.
Right.
There's reasons why things are the way they are. But it's just the cultural differences that make it interesting at times to basically see like, what people think that's a good idea. It's just most times people don't know anything about use.
Well,
Survival things that came about, like kosher foods. There's a why do Jewish culture don't eat cloven hoofed animals? It's interesting. Well, why wouldn't they eat specific animals? Specifically, it came about in early history where cloven hoofed animals were often very disease ridden, and it caused a reduction of population. So the culture developed a set of rules for survival. And a lot of these cultural things can be traced back to survival of your identity, your culture. So, and then roads. Yes, I'm sure I haven't looked into it. I'm sure roads are very important.
I was in Germany also. I've seen freedom of speech laws.
freedom of speech is not considered to be a high value, but there's like Rosa Luxemburg once said, like, your freedom is the freedom of the others. So, and there are examples in the US where yelling fire in a crowded theater is not freedom of speech. At the time when you cause, not actively like doing an action, but cause negative or dangerous consequences or like circumstances, there's like a difference in view or difference in opinion as to how free speech is allowed to be. Whereas like in the US it's fairly free still. But then again, you are not allowed to publicly say specific things. When you go in public and say like, I want to kill the president, you're not allowed to do that. Yeah. Because that is considered a threat on. So, but that clashes with like the fundamental idea of free speech. You want to say that, then if you want free speech, you need to accept things like that. That's a very good topic.
I was going to say many people feel like their country is the best, and but it's I feel like, as you guys were saying, like, you know, every culture isn't necessarily wrong for having certain differences, and so like we might, like, if for those of us who lived in America only, America is all we've known, and we might have this impression that America is the best country. Yeah, cognitive bias. But other people from other countries think their country's the best. So I think it's beneficial to think about things from other people's perspectives. Like, oh yeah, like Germany. I haven't been in Germany, but they view things differently. And what I've thought about is Russia. Like, we have a lot of negativity here towards Russia. For me, I feel like I don't know much about Russia at all, so I don't want to say too much negative about Russia when I know almost nothing about it myself. And you were mentioning something about Venezuela or something that you were interested in. Like, I don't know much about anything about Venezuela at all myself either, so I don't want to. And the thing is, like, America is clearly not a perfect country. We've had a lot of negative stuff in our past, and so it's important to be honest with our own history and realize that we're not the perfect nation, and that other nations may have legitimate complaints against us, and they might have some things better than we do. We might have some things better than they do, but it's not like one country is better than the other necessarily. It's kind of how I see it. I mean, maybe if you were to like know everything about the countries, maybe you could make a definitive statement of which is better. But we don't know a lot about these countries. We don't know. So, did you want to say something or no?
Nice job. Thanks for hosting us today. It's a big commitment to organize something like this. I agree with you. I wouldn't say adversarial. I think you had assumptions, which you can't start a presentation without starting with assumptions. Your assumptions are clear. The word truth is, oh boy, that's about 4 years of these kind of meetings, and it's still be like, huh?
Yeah.
But intentions and motivations is where I started to look at the things you're talking about. I can look at another person and have, an assumption, but I really have to just say, well, what do I think their intentions are? What do I think their motivations are? Culturally, personally, societally, potholey, whatever the topic is, what are the intentions and what are the motivations? And it's my choice to start that process. My choice to start that process as assuming their intentions are positive. assuming your motivations are for ultimate good, ultimate progress. I have what you're talking about. A lot of the cultural differences is very important to me. My wife's Japanese from Japan. I went over to visit her family there. I went to this. Do you know what I mean? I'm just putting those layers on there. Wow. What are they thinking of me? You know, they have to understand. You know, me? No, they don't have to understand me. They don't even have to spend 1 minute to decipher what my father's role was, what our ancestry is. But they can if they want. They can make that choice to speak from intentions. What is this man's intentions? What is this motivation? And they can choose whether to look at positive or negative, whether to open their hearts and their families. And I can tell you, it wasn't easy. I think that your presentation was really accurate. I think that some comments were right, which is don't read from Wikipedia ever. You know, really, only because reading from anything is something we can all do on our own. But you know, I think it's really the topic was important, the subject matter is important. I think you're honed in on something obviously that each one of us could say thank you to, because now our wheels are spinning. Maybe they weren't before we came here, but we've all dug in a little deeper to struggle with something that needs to be struggled with. You're courageous to bring that topic up in the first meeting. You know, I would have brought up like pizza or pomos. You know, something a little more, you know.
Circles.
Well, yeah.
It's not pizza. It's not spherical.
All right, you know, the Sicilian, and we could go there. And I think that what I will end with is this. I was so much. You had me. You know, I was going to say. Sorry, when you're reading from Wikipedia, this is again not criticism, just the obvious. You know, that's when I can glaze. Anyone can glaze when somebody's reading out loud. Don't ever use PowerPoint. Don't read the damn slides, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of obvious stuff. It's when you talked about your from a conservative, your I think brother and sister-in-law are you're in the middle somewhere. I want to know more. I want to know. You said so that makes for interesting conversations. And I went, yeah. And then you went back to Wikipedia. And I'm just making fun of it because we're all like really big catchers.
Yeah.
That's the hook. The hook can't be Wikipedia. The hook's got to be, what does it mean to you? And I know it meant something to me. But that's where you get me on the edge of my seat. And don't lose that hook. Once you put that hook in, really, you know, reel me in nice and slow. Then I'll listen to the Wikipedia.
Yeah.
But that was about 30 seconds of the most interesting part of that, and I didn't get to hear the story. I want story. I want storytelling. Mm-hmm. That's what I want up on the stage. I want somebody to do storytelling. Anyway, long story short, thank you all for thank you all for being here. It's pretty interesting way to spend Saturday, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for organizing it. Good job.
Thank you.
And it's constructive, because if you look at the work involved between creating and criticizing, we have the easy job. And it's not negative criticism, it's positive. Creating something is infinitely harder than to critique and criticize it. So please understand it from that perspective, that we got easy jobs over here at the audience.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, and as I said, I wanted to be a little bit more prepared. I was just, some stuff was coming up for me this week, some personal issues, so it was made it hard.
You will be next time.
Yeah, I'll try to be better prepared.
Your human is showing.
Yeah, what's up with that?
What did you say?
Your human is showing.
I know, right?
What's up with that? We expected a human here today. No, we had AI going to show up and run it for us.
So,
That's good.
if someone wants to do next, they can. If you don't want it recorded, we don't have to have it recorded. So, or we can do as you guys said, record it, and then you can view it and see if you're comfortable with it being posted. So, does anyone want to share something?
Take a break.